And well, of course, we'll be back from the break. And besides the fact that we've got 25 minutes to the top of the hour, well, at the top of the hour, which is 8 a.m., with just 15 minutes past that same hour is when the Zabo markets open. So the idea is use the USSD code *292# and follow the dashboard for Zabo situations and Zabo investment. Zabo, which is a platform by Altex East Africa, says my money, my future. And Altex East Africa says do something new. Well, the only good new thing that you can do ahead of New Year is to kickstart your investment journey into Uganda's financial market space. And you can invest in government bonds, securities, and of course purchase bonds. Well, on the other hand, if you're to look at that, with a minimum of 15,000 Ugandan shillings, Zabo says you can invest in bonds and securities. Well, besides that, these markets open at 8:15 a.m. and close at 3:15 p.m. East African Standard Time. Please note that these markets only close on weekends and on public holidays. Well, the month of December has been a good one, that the public holidays only came during weekends as well. So giving you the opportunity to invest as much as you can. And January presents itself with only one public holiday, which is the 26th of January. And so besides that, you can invest. Altex East Africa, do something new. Okay, now with Karibu East Africa, we've head to Rwanda as the Rwandese are feeling pinch as the cost of living and unemployment continues to soar. Now, Rwanda economic monitors are apparently making a tightrope to contain a drastic rise in the cost of living that is reducing incomes and hitting the country's vulnerable households hard. While the International Monetary Fund has recommended further tightening of monetary policy, there is a risk that this could undermine economic growth still reeling from the pandemic in Rwanda. Now, the figures released by the National Institute of Statistics this week shows that the economy did expand by 10% in the third quarter, following a 7.5% growth in the second quarter and the 7.9% in the first quarter. And this is well above the initial projections of 6.8% for the whole year. The growth is largely attributed to a strong rebound of the country's service sector, which expanded by 17%, fueled by the recovery of the meeting, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions. That is a sector where the country has hosted several international meetings. Now, when you look at the fact that the Rwandans are feeling the pinch, now figures that were released by the Institute show that the economy expanded by just 10% in the entire period. Now, this growth is largely attributed to a strong rebound of the country's service sector, and which expanded by 17%, fueled by the recovery of the meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions sector, as the country has hosted several international meetings. Now, while the Rwandan economy is on a rebound, the drastic rise in the cost of living has taken away the shine, as many of the households are struggling to make ends meet because of higher food prices and unemployment that remains high. This is approximately at around 18% for the citizens in Rwanda. Now, data by the World Bank shows Rwanda is among the top 10 countries globally which are worst affected by food price inflation, with real food inflation year-on-year increasing by 14%, while nominal food inflation rose by 34% between June and September of this very year. Now, rising food prices are partly attributed to the poor performance of the agriculture sector due to the bad weather, while the National Bank of Rwanda has raised its key interest rate 3 times this year, and then the most recently was in November by 50%, and that was an increase of 6.5%, as inflation has remained high in Rwanda. Now, Rwanda's consumer price index, the main gauge of inflation, increased by 21.7% year-on-year in November, up from 20.1% in October this very year. Then the price of food and non-alcoholic beverages increased by 45.4% on annual basis and 1.3% on month-on-month. Now, the prices of fresh produce increased by 52.1% on an annual change and 1.4% on a monthly basis. So when you look at the same situations here, Kigali steadily taking the highest, or one could call the lion's share of the higher percentage, but inflation still another key hindrance in the East African Community region. Now, we turn our eyes again back to KQ. KQ, the Kenya Airways, is actually still in some huge mess and some huge saga And this time around, taxpayers are set to take over the 59.7 billion Kenyan shillings Kenya Airways loans, as the Kenyan government will take over Kenya Airways loans amounting to $485. That is $485 million, approximately 59.7 billion shillings, that it had guaranteed the carrier as part of its rescue plan for the troubled airline. Now, the National Treasury in Kenya told the International Monetary Fund that it will undertake many such takeovers of these stressed loans, technically known as novations, and of course pushing up the country's annual debt service by 10 billion shillings. This adds to the country's debt repayment woes, which have been aggravated by a weaker shilling amid its tightening liquidity in a global financial market that makes it difficult for high-risk frontiers economies like Kenya to get cheap financing. Now, the airline has been a perennial beneficiary of state bailout, with the carrier expected to receive another 35 billion shillings in the current financial year, with some of it being used to repay its debts. Now, KQ, as Kenya Airways is known as known by the International Court, defaulted on part of its $525 million, approximately 64.6 billion Kenya shillings loan from Private Export Funding Corporation of USA and guaranteed by Exim Bank of USA, for in turn were guaranteed by the government of Kenya. Now, the KQ loan that was called as a result of loan payment defaults was for the purchase of 7 aircraft and 1 new engine. Then Treasury says that following this same default of KQ, so the government's intervention and the cabinet gave approvals of the government to repay the loan on behalf of the airline, with the balance of the guaranteed loan being taken over by the state to prevent further call-up. The loan repayment done on behalf of Kenya Airways by the state shall be recovered through a subsidiary loan agreement between government and the airline as per the requirements of the PFM Act of 2012. Now, President William Ruto's government has been shopping for strategic investor, and on a recent foreign tour with the US Africa Summit, he had the head of state met up top executives of Delta Airlines, where he launched a government bid to sell its entire 48.9% stake in Kenya Airways to ensure that the airlines does recover from the losses it has been incurring since COVID-19. Lastly, we switch to Tanzania, as 2 mining farms are set for a $195 million battle in the High Court. Now, a legal battle is ensuring at the Commercial Division of the High Court of Tanzania, where 2 mining firms are battling it out in a case involving a breach of non-disclosures and non-compete agreement. Tanzania's Pula Graphite partners and its parent firm, the Pula Group LLC, have filed a lawsuit. This particular one is against a South African-based African Rainbow Minerals, the ARM, claiming $195 million in damages for alleged breaches of their non-disclosure and the non-compete agreement. Now, despite the ongoing court vacation, and of course the case is scheduled for pre-trial hearing on January 10th, 2023. Now, these 2 mining farms in Tanzania is actually set to battle for a case that is in a region of 195 million US dollars in the High Court. Now, filed through advocate Kamanga Wilbert Kapinga of the KW Kapinga and Partners, the case is based on July 2019 agreement between these 2 firms. Now, in the agreement, the 2 parties are said to have signed a 2-year agreement that compelled them to share confidential information that would put either a company at a competitive disadvantage should either company share the information or use it to enter into an agreement with a competitor who is actually a potential competitor. Now, Pula argues in the documentations that before the court that during the period covered by the agreement, the ARM invested in an Australian company known as Evolution. Now, the company Evolution also explores for graphite in Ruangwa in Lindi region in Tanzania, which is Pula's graphite project, which is also located in Ruangwa. So that is the detail coming in from the particular case in the mining sector of Tanzania. And that is it for the press. That is it for East Africa this morning. Now let's switch our eyes to the SMB international news. And with the international news, we kick off from the North African country of Tunisia, which is set to raise new taxes to close budget deficit. The Tunisian finance minister unveiled the budget Monday, aiming to use new tax revenues to collect and close the deficit back to near 5% of gross domestic product as the cash-strapped country awaits an international bailout. Now, the 2023 budget comes as the nation, the North African country, grapples with eye-watering public debt, shortages of goods from sugar to petrol, and inflation at nearly 10%. Now, the latest plan aims to cut the budget deficit from 7.7% of gross domestic product to 5.2%, according to the finance minister Sihim Bogwidiri, as addressing to journalists. Now, they saddled with a crippling public wage bill and the politically sensitive subsidies is set to take in around 46.6 billion dinars, that is approximately 14.8 billion US dollars, according to the same matter. Now, it will need to borrow, according to the government, they will need to borrow a sum of 23.5 billion dinars, that is Tunisian dinars, to cover state needs for the coming year as well. Now, to find the cash, it will seek for more than $4 billion from overseas, as well as some $3 billion from local banks, according to the fiscal plan. Now, in order to boost the revenues, the government has imposed a new tax of 0.5% on real estate assets worth over 3 million dinars, that is approximately 960,000 US dollars, cash payments of over 5,000 dinars, which will be taxed at 20%, while taxes on some professional services, such as legal services, will be hiked to 19%, up from 13%. The budget is also based on assumptions of 1.8% GDP growth, oil at $89 a barrel, and a deal with the International Monetary Fund for a 1.9 billion bailout loan. Economy Minister Samil Said has predicted 2023 would be a very difficult year and that inflation would hit a 10.5% increase. So as you look at the same situation, these are some of the key guidelines that you need to follow up with the current crisis in Tunisia. Now, away from Tunisia, we head to China, as China has ended COVID quarantine for travelers that will take effect in January. China will scrap quarantine for travelers from 8th January, according to what officials have revealed. And this makes the last major shift from the country's zero COVID policy. This is after almost 3 years of closed borders, and this will reopen the country to those with work and study visas or seeking to visit family. The Chinese citizens will also be able to travel overseas, the immigration authorities said on Tuesday, as COVID has spread ferociously in the wake of restrictions being lifted. Reports also suggest that hospitals are overwhelmed and elderly people are quickly dying off in China. And the true toll, daily case counts and death is currently unknown because officials have stopped releasing COVID data. Now, Beijing had reported about 4,000 new COVID infections each day last week and few deaths. Then on Sunday, it said it would stop publishing case numbers altogether, but the British health data firm Affinity estimated that China was experiencing more than 1 million infections and 5,000 deaths a day. China is the largest economy in the world to move to living, is the last major economy in the world to move to living with COVID after 3 years of lockdowns. They apparently closed borders and mandatory quarantine for COVID cases and contacts. The so-called zero COVID approach battered the economy and made citizens wary of restrictions and then repeated tests as well. Now, closed borders remain the last major restrictions since March 2020. Anyone entering China had to undergo mandatory quarantine at a state facility for up to 3 weeks at a time. That was recently reduced to 5 days. But on Monday, the National Health Commission announced that COVID would be formally downgraded to Class B infectious disease on 8th January. And then, of course, that meant quarantine would be axed, although incoming travelers will still need to take a PCR test. A cap on the daily number of flights allowed into China would also be scrubbed off entirely. Now, lastly, as we look at the aftermath of the Christmas Day, we head to the United Kingdom, as this time round, the Boxing Day shoppers have raised up nearly 40%, but though these figures are still lower than before the COVID-19 pandemic, but slightly higher than the 2 years of COVID. Now, footfall was 18.24%, lower than Boxing Day in 2019 across all United Kingdom retail destinations, showing that there were still fewer shoppers turning out to higher streets, as well as shopping centers and retail parks than before the pandemic. Now, the number of Boxing Day shoppers rose by nearly 40% compared to last year, but remained below pre-pandemic levels as the cost of living pressures weigh on consumers. shoppers. Now, more shoppers were drawn to Boxing Day as sales this year last in all retail settings across the UK. Now, according to data from retail analytics company Springboard, by 12 p.m. on Boxing Day, footfall was up 50.1% on 2021. The company's data shows now footfall increased by 44.1% on high streets, 40.4% in shopping centers, and 25.9% in retail parks across the day as a whole. Now, also on the other hand, Springboard's data shows Boxing Day footfall in the UK was 38.8% higher than in 2021 by the end of the day. In central London, the number of shoppers was up at 139.2% on 2021 at 12 p.m. Now, by the end of the day, it was 66% higher overall compared to 2021. Then, by midday on Boxing Day, the greatest increase was recorded in Northern Ireland, where 5 times as many people attended 26 December sales. So, they were picking up in the United Kingdom, not like the pre-pandemic levels, but higher than the 2 years of 2020 to 2021. And of course, that is a very huge sign that the economies are steadily recovering. But the United Kingdom has for the last few months been hit by increase in inflation, and of course, also recording the highest inflation pressures on a record of 40 years. So that clearly shows you how the country has been affected, or how the region of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, inclusive Britain, as well as Wales and Scotland, in that same basket. You're watching Smart Men's Business. That is it for Karibu, East Africa, and of course the SMB International updates this morning. But also to quickly remind you, you can follow us on our social media platforms. Twitter is Smart24TV, Facebook is Smart24TV official, Instagram is Smart24_TV. Then you can as well link with us on LinkedIn. The website is www.smart24.tv officially, and then our YouTube channel is streaming live at Smart24TV Live. So quickly dive onto that and let's drive your business as it's supposed to be. Good morning. I'll be right back at the top of the hour.